Hello everybody and welcome back to another one of those Future of the Fortress read-alongs where I read the Future of the Fortress posts. If you're unfamiliar with what these are, it's a monthly Q&A that Tarn does on the Bay 12 forums. Essentially the way this works is people post questions and Tarn answers them. It's quite self-explanatory really. If you would like to take part in these conversations, you can find the link to the actual thread down beneath this video. From there, you can then make an account on the forums, which might take a little bit for it to get accepted. Once it's accepted, you can then take part in these Q&As, and maybe even have your name read out on this show. But before we read the questions and answers, we are going to read Tarn's Bay 12 monthly report, because we don't have any writing from Zach this month, which makes me kind of sad, to be honest. And Tarn writes, the Bay 12 Games Report, June 1st, 2024. Entering June with more menus to do. In the next beta release, you'll be able to spit again, and breathe fire, and raise the dead, and roll armadillo, person, ball. And I'm also assuming pet your dog. Just going to keep plugging away and working to finish the beta menus, and get the new systems in, deities, etc. And then merge everything back into the main release branch. Except there will be some additional beta releases first for sure. Our first ever 20% off sale went quite well. 23.7 thousand copies sold in May. And now things will be chill for a bit, we expect. Now because last month's Future of the Fortress was a little bit late, I'm expecting this one to be a bit short. But we'll see how it turns out. First question comes in from Zinrai, and they say, I noticed that during World Gen, there is a huge boom of new sites during the first 100 years or so, which, after the expansion quiets down, some roads start being made, and some crypts and monasteries. Since World Gen has been made significantly faster now, would it be reasonable to slow down how quickly civilizations expand? I guess I could increase the site cap, but I'd rather have a world that's 500 years and still growing steadily. Also, one small feature that has been missing since the Steam version came out that's really bugging me. You can't click on gods in the relationship tabs anymore. That's how I found out ages ago that my Civ had their own special gods in the first place. And right now, it seems like I have to build statues of them or hunt them down in Legends mode to find out what appearance they have. Is this coming back? Oh yeah, and birthdays of dwarfs. I miss knowing those. And Tarn's response is, I'm not inclined to slow down the rates myself for vanilla. I'd rather more disasters happened, and there was other tumult with groups and such, than to have less stuff. It seems like the only relevant variable here is the abstract entity population rate. Since the historical figures are based on too many things, exposing that as a parameter at some point would be reasonable for people that want a different pace. And I'll check that those are in the list of unfinished old business and add them if not. The second question comes in from aspatula66, and they say, I recently noticed that none of the vanilla entities have stonecutter or stone carver as permitted jobs. And although modding them to have stonecutter works fine, adding stone carver does nothing and creates an error in the error log. I also noticed some issues with mummies in adventure mode. They only curse you after exiting and re-entering combat with them. And then their curse is missing text. It just appears as quotation marks in the announcement log. Mummies not cursing you is something I've noticed in the previous version, but the thing with the text is likely because of how speech files were changed with the Steam release. And Tarn says, okay, I'll throw them on the bug pile. Another question or comment from Spatula66, and they say, what I meant was that though the civilizations have headwear and underwear assigned NPCs, never spawn with them as clothing. From my observations, legwear on the underlayer doesn't appear, and bodywear on the cover layer only appears on thieves. Headwear on the underlayer appears, but headwear on the other layers don't, except for items that on the cover layer, which only appear on thieves. All this only seems to apply to clothing and not armor, though. I've also noticed that NPCs only generate with one clothing item per body part, other than feet, which do not generate both socks and shoes. And Tarn's response is, yep, and I didn't make an intentional change there, so throwing it on the bug pile. A question from a very funny username, which is Falling Ferret, and they say, is support for wider/larger fonts for ASCII mode planned? And Tarn's response is, yeah, we haven't gotten around to breaking free from the 8x12 and 32x32 limits on the interface and play area elements. The next question comes in from, once again, Spatula66, who's becoming the star of the show, and they say, why are migrants restricted to the main species of your civilization? It makes no sense that even if half of your civilization is non-dwarves, they can't arrive as migrants. Maybe the first two generated migrant waves could be the only dwarves, and after that, non-dwarves are half as likely as dwarves to migrate to your fortress, if you want to keep the amount of non-dwarven migrants low. In addition to making no sense, I feel like it's a large contributing factor in spreading the misconception, especially among newer players, that species equals civilization. Although I think the DF Wiki, which is equally to blame, given they don't even have separate articles for the elven species and elven civilization, or the dwarven species and dwarven civilization, etc. Also, why do people only immigrate to your fortress instead of immigrating from your fortress? Maybe they would only do it if they're unhappy with your fortress and you permit them to, so that you have some control over it. And Tarn quotes DPH Kraken and also a Spatula66, star of the show, so I'm going to read their responses and then we'll continue with Tarn's response. So Kraken says, in regards to migrants, I recall that this was intentional, mainly because different species can have different clothing sizes, and that creates some headaches with the present labor system. This does seem like a question of being able to define and label your fort's relationship with the greater world. And Spatula's response is, it sounds like an issue with the game not making it clear about how tedious it is to make clothing for differently sized species then. Although 3 out of 4 of the main species have dwarf-sized clothing, so it would only be an issue with humans and animal people. And Tarn's response is, yeah, as DPH Kraken said, this was about clothing as I recall. Immigration is a much bigger deal because it takes from the player, and it was also harder to implement in the past. It has been on the table for a while now, I just haven't gotten around to it. But I have to be careful about swiping citizens from people. So this is a multi-parter from Rorax, and so I'm going to space it out as best I can. First question is, what's the biggest impediment for enjoyable, fast development of new features? Let's say map rewrite, code-wise. And Tarn's response is, just getting done with adventure mode. Then I should be able to get started. For the map rewrite specifically, some of the ways of the underground layer stuff is woven into everything is going to be difficult to tease out piecemeal, but it's the aim to try. Then Rorax follows up with, could you share a bit about what goes into migrating a piece of old menu to the new system? What are the issues you faced in porting the UI in general? And Tarn's response is, I just need to set up some scroll bars and index some textures and place some buttons. It's not very enjoyable generally, it's just mind-numbing at this point. We dodged the largest issues by sticking with the ASCII grid. Some of the layering is still annoying because we can't have graphics and text over each other, and more than once, which makes certain sub-windows impossible to do, especially at smaller overall resolutions and window sizes. It would be easier if they could all live together nicely without thinking about overlap. Keyboard support is, of course, an ongoing challenge. And then they ask about the bug tracker, which is Mantis, and they say, is Mantis still working as expected? Do you still find it useful to have community submit bugs there? And Tarn's response is, I know the Mantis has had some bumps, which I haven't heard about recently. So hopefully it's working. I haven't really been deeply into the new Mantis yet, since the basic menu work isn't done. The next question is, any chance for adding sound effect on the UI, element clicks, for additional feedback? And Tarn's response is, we already have sounds available. I just have to link them in for adventure mode menus. For fort mode menus, we need to have a whole meeting with the audio team, etc. Since the two engines for the modes need to be linked up. The next question is, any plan to make food prices less OP? They already nerfed them massively, you should have seen them before, geez. And Tarn's response is, food has always been a bit weird. We tightened up a lot of prices for the initial release, but food prices are still out of control. They should be fixed, yeah. The next and final question is, how has the collaboration with DFHack team been recently? What is the vision for the future, now that some things from DFHack, like sorting, are natively supported? Will you or Putnam be looking into porting more features to the game? And Tarn's response is, everything's been going well with DFHack, as far as I can tell. I don't have a specific list of DFHack features that I'm looking at this time, but I'm sure it'll come up again. The next question comes in from Buttery Mess, and they say, up until now, the artistic team has mostly been playing catch-up to the existing game assets. When it's done with that, will there be the opportunity for new plants and animals to be added to the game? Or should I stop praying for hawthorn and magnolias and fuchsias to be added and mod it in myself? As it stands, in adventure mode, nothing can really keep up to a jogging pace for that long without getting knackered. Although endurance is varied and recuperation, AFIK, recuperation can't be trained. Consequently, dwarves or anything else can't ever really train to run marathons. Is this something that might change when you take another look at combat? What really stands out in the combat code that you want to take a look at? And Tarn's response is, I'm not sure when we'll get new plants and animals. The art team isn't really the blocker there. Just the current ones not feeling fleshed out enough, kind of. Things like capybaras being the only ones with sounds and all that. Ranged combat is the worst, and endurance generally is trouble for sure. How death works could be changed, and skills should be more interesting. Special attack opportunities are deeply silly and should be integrated into some whole other mechanism, and so forth. The next question comes from Zeros, and they say, this user claims that a dwarf in their fortress succumbed to melancholy, but a cave-in incident caused his skull to be shattered and his brain to be severely damaged. Following treatment and recovery, that dwarf is no longer suffering from melancholy and resumed eating and drinking and no longer has any memory of his family. Is this an actual deliberate feature? Like, as in recovery from insanity, I mean. But also the memory loss. That went undocumented at some point? Or a fascinating bug that IMO should be elevated to feature? Or just a rando on the internet making up stories, I suppose. And Tarn quotes Eric Blank, so I'll read their response first, and they say, wait, traumatic brain injury isn't actually linked to anything but the soul. It wouldn't affect memory, personality, or insanity, and this treatment should have been resurrected from the dead by a necromancer, if anything, because any major brain injury is instant death. Also, Putnam adds to the thread shortly after, brain damage causes instant death generally, so I have my suspicions. And Tarn's response is, yeah, there isn't anything deliberate here anyway. And then he laughs. My theory as to what happened is the dwarf did get resurrected and the player didn't notice. Or alternatively, it's actually a ghost floating around and it just has the bug where they appear as a dwarf but don't have any clothes on. And instead of being kind of the green ghosty color, just look dwarf color. I've seen that too. Or it's just somebody lying on the internet. Regardless, brain damage causes instant death, but I would like Dwarven Phineas Gage to exist. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you would like to see more of these, well, I've been doing them for 2 years now, so there will be more in the future. Regardless, thank you very much for watching this video. Take care of yourselves, drink some water, and I hope to see you either in the thread next month or in the next one. And of course, do you think brain damage should cause instant death?